think it's about 5 or 6 seconds. Just to not leave you hanging, since the sheriff had just got out of the car and, lay down your weapons, so couldn't leave you hanging. Okay, Detente, part 1. Detente is like an easing of hostilities. So, Detente, part 1. The sheriff stepped out of his car. In his middle 50s, his close-cropped gray hair had gone gray at the temples, and he was beginning to thicken at the waist, but it was plain the man had worn a uniform for much of his life. Deputy Mike Daniels stepped out of the other side. A second ASO, Sheriff Department cruiser, Alachua, cruiser pulled up on the other side of the barricading trucks, and 2 deputies stepped out but did not advance. Walking up to the fallen tree, Sheriff Freed spoke up to the man sitting on the trunks. "You John Horn?" The man nodded his head. "Yes, sir, I am." "Good," came the reply as he climbed over the trunks. "Attend me, please." He then walked up to the captain, who had not moved since before the sheriff's arrival. "Good afternoon, Captain Swift. I have just driven hell for leather to get here from a meeting of county sheriffs at Camp Blanding after my office called to tell me that members of my posse were about to engage in a war with troops from the local Recovery Command headquarters. Sure enough, here you are, all about to kill one another. What in flaming hell is going on here?" The captain did not immediately respond, as if he were struggling for control. Presently he spoke. "Sheriff Freed, I am attempting to execute my orders given to me by the Florida State Recovery Headquarters at Blanding as per the National Recovery Executive Directive. I have been asked to inventory the livestock and feed of every listed farmer in this county. You know as well as I do how short of manpower we are, so any delays must be quickly and immediately resolved if we are to be able to carry out our mission in a timely fashion. You also know how close we are to losing control of the camps, which further food shortages and the resulting riots they bring will only exacerbate. Mr. Horn here has absolutely refused to cooperate, even after it has been repeatedly explained to him both the legality of our mission and the practical need for doing so. What's more, he has now inspired seemingly his entire local community to rebel with him, and if this is not immediately resolved, may well render our entire supply mission untenable as his rebellion spreads across the county, possibly into the surrounding counties as well. I have both the orders and the legal authority to carry out this inventory, and by God, I intend to do so." Sheriff Freed nodded his head. "I see. Do you have a copy of the list that Mr. Horn and his neighbors appear on?" The sergeant, Swift turned to Sergeant Nichols and said, "Give the list to the sheriff." The sergeant pulled it out of his breast pocket and handed it over. The sheriff studied the list for a moment and then turned to John and asked, "Mr. Horn, have you ever sold anything down to the livestock auction? Sell any feed grain or raise any for your own farm animals?" John replied, "Sheriff, in the 10 years we've been out here, I've sold 2 goats and 1 pig at the auction that my daughter had named and wouldn't have anything to do with the eating of if I'd slaughtered them. We've bought farm animals, but we've seldom sold any. Mostly we eat them ourselves. I participate in an heirloom seed preservation program, so I grow between 1/4 to 1/2 acre of corn every year to keep the strain viable. What I don't sell for seed or plant myself, we feed to the livestock, but it amounts to a small portion of the feed we use every year. We do have a flock of 40 hens, and we sell eggs to our co-workers at the university, to our neighbors now post-impact. I raise 2 pigs a year. We put 1 in our freezer and usually sell the other to a neighbor, but with no way to buy food in town anymore, and having taken in another family to live with us since the asteroid strike, we'll probably eat that one too. What money we've made since coming here on what we raise ourselves probably doesn't amount to half of what we spent on producing it. That's why we do it. I don't know everyone here very well, but I can tell you that of all of us that I do know, only Ed Strickland over there actually farms or raises anything for the market that can be eaten. You know most of the ag around here is tree or hay farming." The sheriff nodded his head again. "I see. Turning back to the officer, Captain Swift, where did you say this list of Alachua County farmers came from again? Glancing at John, the captain replied, it was sent to me from Blanding. I don't know for sure who actually generated the list, but my orders about it are clear enough. Nodding his head once more, he then asked, Captain, from the sound of you, you're not from Florida. This part, anyways. Where do you hail from? Swift answered, I'm from Philadelphia. I went to school there, too, and joined the Army after college. Why? Another head nod, much as I expected. You don't know one end of a cow from the other. Some bureaucratic peewit got a hold of records from some place or other and compiled a list of people he thinks are farmers without bothering to verify the truth of what he was putting on that list. It got sent out to only God knows where and put into the hands of some local commander without the experience, imagination, or initiative to question the intelligence of what he's been told to do. The captain reddened and his mouth opened to speak, but the sheriff cut him off and continued, Now, when you get back to town, Captain Swift, I suggest you contact Larry Forrester. He's the cooperative extension agent for this county. He will be able to compile you a listing of everyone in Alachua County that holds an agricultural property tax exemption. Likely he'll also be able to give you a general idea of what that exemption was granted for, so you won't be pestering some fellow who, with 100 acres of pine trees, or some other fellow who only raises hay. I hold such an exemption myself for the 75 head of Angus I run. Those are the folks you should be approaching. Most of them are going to be in the same position that Ed and I are in about being hard up for feed, forage, or hay to get through this winter. So if you'll approach them in a civil fashion, they'll probably sell you what you need. Further, I suggest you get a hold of these experts that compiled this list and see if they can't come up with some formula that the hay farmers can sell, trade, swap, or whatever their forage to the local dairy farms so they can keep milking their cows rather than having to slaughter them. Swift swallowed what he had been about to say and paused for a moment and then spoke. I'll have to confer with Blanding about changing their orders, but it sounds like a workable idea. Freed smiled and said, Excellent, Captain. Now I suggest you hurry home then and contact Colonel Scott at Fort Blanding because I can tell you he is most anxious to hear from you. I'm quite sure Mr. Horn here will ask those gentlemen in those trucks to move them out of your way. The mention of his commanding officer's anxiety to speak with him set Swift's jaw into a rigid cast, but he said nothing about it. With another glance at John, he spoke, Sheriff, I'm not about to openly cross the local civil authority over a matter such as this. I will confer with the colonel and inform him of the situation here. Once he has decided the policy on this matter, I will get this program back on track. Good day to you, sir. With a last glance at John, he turned towards his troops and shouted, Let's load up. We're going back to base, and walked away back stiff. His opponent pulled the little FRS radio out of his pocket and spoke into it. Miguel, you and Roberto go and move those trucks out of the way. The good captain's calling it a day.